All right, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Smoke&Spirits. I'm your host, Dominic, and as promised in the last episode, I told you we'd pay a visit to the fabled Lagavulin Distillery. We're not actually going there. I have never been there, but we're going to say that we're going to go there spiritually, metaphorically, by way of sampling one of their expressions here. Lagavulin has a few core expressions, probably the most notable of which is the 16-year, and that's probably one of my favorite drams. And if you're a peat head like myself, if you're really into the Islay single malts, it's probably one of your favorites as well. In fact, when most people think of the Islay single malts, they think of probably two things. They think of peat, like the heavy, smoky peat, and they probably think of Lagavulin. If you ask any sort of enthusiast of the Islay single malts out there, they'll probably name Lagavulin as one of their top 3. So we looked at Ardbeg for the past 2 episodes. We saw the Corey Vrecken, we saw the Ugadal, and like Ardbeg, the Lagavulin Distillery sits in the southeastern tip of Islay, just down the road from the Ardbeg Distillery. And between the 3 of them, there's Ardbeg, there's Lagavulin, and there's Laphroaig. There are some stories about some rivalry in the past between Lagavulin and Laphroaig, but that's probably a story for another time. I'd like to dedicate some time to Laphroaig, give it its own episode, because that's definitely one of my favorites here. So aside from the 16-year, Lagavulin also offers up an 8-year, which is a great expression as well. Surprising, because a lot of people tend to think that to make a good Scotch, you have to let it rest for a really long time. So a lot of people tend to think of a 16 or an 18 year as being inherently better than, say, an 8-year or even a 3-year. And as I mentioned, I think in one of the previous episodes, age statements are still very much there in the world of Scotch whiskey, but they're by no means the be-all and end-all. So you can find really good whiskey with no age statement or with a younger age statement. Aside from the 16-year, they've got the 8-year, like I said. They have a 9-year, which appeared in the Game of Thrones sort of lineup of Scotch whiskies. I'm not a huge Game of Thrones fan. For me, that series just kind of went down the drain when the Red Viper was killed. I was a big fan of Oberyn Martell, and once he bit the dust, it was all over for me. However, the Lagavulin 9-year is the House Lannister, I guess, whiskey that was offered up during that Game of Thrones promotion. So what I'm looking at here today is the Lagavulin 11-year. It is the Nick Offerman edition. And of course, we all know who Nick Offerman is. He's a bit of a Renaissance man. We know him and we love him for his role as Ron Swanson in the Parks and Rec show. And aside from that, Mr. Offerman apparently is an avid woodworker. So you can see the box itself is sort of done up in this wood grain sort of finish. And what happened here was at some point Mr. Offerman actually went to Islay and actually visited the Lagavulin Distillery. And I guess Lagavulin is his favorite Scotch. And if you know the truth is otherwise, Mr. Offerman, please let me know. I'd be delighted to hear from you. However, I'm going to go with sort of the common consensus that Lagavulin is Nick Offerman's favorite Scotch whiskey. So he collaborated with Colin Gordon, who's the distillery manager at Lagavulin, and came up with this 11-year. And while the 11-year definitely has that strong peat base that we've come to know and love from Lagavulin, among other Islay single malts, this one is a little bit different, and you can tell when you nose it, and you can tell when you taste it. So you've got some sweet berries, and this is stuff that's all there in the promotional literature, and Mr. Offerman has said so himself. And you can find it in most reviews about it, so it's no mystery. He worked hard with Mr. Gordon from Lagavulin to produce something that not only had the peat base, but had some fairly lively notes mixed in there. So before we sort of get into it, I think we wouldn't be able to do this justice without sort of reading out loud the statement from Mr. Offerman himself. So he's very passionate about his Scotch, and he's written something here that I would like to read to you because I'm not certain if you can get this anymore. If you can, if you find this somewhere, then by all means snap it up. So this is the Lagavulin Offerman edition, aged 11 years. Whoever first said, "Be sure to stop and smell the roses," must have never tried Lagavulin. For my part, I say a well-crafted life is one in which your whiskey is poured when you have ample time to savor it. When the day's work is done, and you can take the time to properly imbibe the robust goodness in your dram, well, it puts the smelling of flowers of any stripe to shame. At Offerman Wood Shop, I select my various wood species for their strength, density, and rich visual beauty. With the discernment I've also applied to my choice of single malt. For this Lagavulin Offerman edition, I'm grateful that my passion for wood has been brought to bear by utilizing refilled and rejuvenated American white oak casks in the maturation process. So just a side note, a refilled cask is pretty much exactly what that says. A rejuvenated cask is one in which the inside has been scraped out and it's been recharred. So a lot of those sweet caramel notes that you detect in your whiskey actually comes from the cask and the charring that's on the inside of the cask. So when they say rejuvenated cask, it just means that the inside's been scraped out and it's been recharred. Okay? The romance begins with an initial whiff of peppery green apple, followed swiftly by a jitterbug of stewed berries. The tangy spice from the handmade charred casks perfectly couples in a tango with the peaty burnt ember characters, featuring a sensation on the nose reminiscent of your favorite campfire. To taste, the woody peaty notes lead from the front, gently tingling the tongue in a cha-cha before fading to reveal a veritable waltz of sweet berry and orchard fruit notes. The familiar Lagavulin Distillery character steps forth, presenting aromatic peat with every sip. A few moments after the liquid has gone, that peaty essence remains, characterizing a wonderfully energetic flamenco finish from a redoubtable liquid with an unmistakable panache for which I'm tickled to write box copy. It looks great in a tutu to boot. This 11-year Lagavulin is like a top-shelf brass band, blowing smoky jazz and marching straight down your gullet. Those are bold words, Mr. Offerman. We shall put them to the test, and we will crack open this bottle and get right into it. Well, there's a healthy dram. I'm not sure I meant to pour quite so much, but I am excited, and who can blame me? So this one actually clocks in at 46%, in case you're wondering, 46% alcohol by volume. So it's a little bit more heavy duty than sort of the 40% that a lot of scotches present with. All right. So this is sort of a almost like a pale honey, like a very sunny sort of amber liquid that I'm looking at here. Now the top nosing notes that I'm getting from this glass, I would say differ quite a bit from the Lagavulin 16 or even the Lagavulin 8. Certainly, I'm not getting any peat from those top notes. In fact, these top notes are quite bright to me. They're very floral. And if you sort of take your time with it, and as I mentioned, this glass is actually quite full, so it doesn't really lend itself too well to tipping onto the side, but I'm gonna do my best anyway. I'm gonna start way up here and make my way down into it. Now, I'd have to agree with the green apple that the box copy has mentioned. I don't know about peppery, but green apple certainly. And it is floral, almost like a wildflower. Believe it or not, there's a hint of lavender there for me as well. And a touch of green grass. So those are the top notes, and those are pretty delicate. I would hazard a guess, and I would say that you probably won't get that if you just jam your nose sort of right in there and dig right in. As well, you saw me add a little bit of water to this, which is sort of my standard practice a lot of the time for anything above 40%. I want to enjoy the full range of scent, and I want to enjoy all of the aromas, and I want to enjoy all the tasting notes. And it's my belief that you can only do that after adding a little bit of water to sort of really open it up. So I'm going to make my way past down through the floral notes, those top notes. And I'm not really picking up the stewed berries that's mentioned on the box copies. There are some bright notes there, and it's notable for that, for sure, because like I said, with the other expressions from Lagavulin that I've had the 8 and I've had the 16. Those aren't expressions to me that jump out at you with bright floral notes necessarily. They're quite heavy on the smoke and the peat. But this one has it in spades. I'm just not really getting the berries. Or if I am, I would probably say that, you know, the box copy made mention of stewed berries. Maybe sort of stewed to the point where maybe the fructose has started to caramelize a little bit, for sure. And then when you get right down into it, you've got the peat, you've got a whiff of smoke, but it's lifted up and it's mitigated and cut through with bright, briny ocean air, is what I get from this. Now, what's surprising for me is that on the palate, it's got a good mouthfeel. It's not thick, it's not oily. There's just a very pleasant sort of coating there. But this is where the peat starts to come through in a really big way. Is it just sort of surges right in there, and you definitely get that right off the bat on the palate for sure. But we mentioned in some of the nosing notes that we had sort of bright floral notes. I got some lavender there, I got some wildflower there, some grass. And what's really neat about this is there was also a bit of that bright, briny ocean air that came through on the nosing notes. You get that a little bit as well on the palate, and the peat isn't overwhelming. It's very lively. You've got that sort of ocean breeze sort of buoying it up, I guess, to use a nautical analogy. But one thing that's surprising is that you've got a fairly strong citrus note punching its way through that peat. And actually, it's a really good thing because it helps to balance out the darkness and the heaviness of the peat smoke. But interestingly enough, on the finish, the finish isn't overly long, but it is sweet, almost cakey. Almost like a little bit of gingerbread, a little bit of spice there for sure. If I had to try to nail it down, I would say kind of like not that crisp, like sharp gingerbread, more like the cakey gingerbread for sure. Quite a taste adventure. The finish is a little bit on the longer side, and once the cakiness, once the sweetness and the spice of the gingerbread has worn off, there's just a touch of a little bit of bitterness, maybe a little bit of seaweed bitterness, because it does have a bit of salt tang to it. But that's about it. It is a little bit on the longer side, I would say, with the finish. Now the name Lagavulin is actually an anglicization of the Scottish Gaelic for hollow of the mill. And as I mentioned in days long past, the story goes that there was a bit of a rivalry between Lagavulin and Laphroaig, with Lagavulin being accused of trying to copy the Laphroaig style. Of course, when analyses were conducted and tests were run, it was determined that the peat and the water that showed up in Lagavulin were not the same as those that showed up in Laphroaig. I'm not sure if the rivalry continues to this day. Certainly, I think everybody, I would like to think everybody gets along on Islay in terms of how business is run in the distilleries. Probably a bit of friendly rivalry for sure. But getting back to Mr. Offerman and his tremendous 11-year Lagavulin, it is a phenomenal dram, I think, if you know what you're in for. So for fans of the really heavy, wild and savage Islay single malts, we talked about Corey Vrecken as being a perfect example of that. I'd like to take some time in a future episode to talk about the Laphroaig Quarter Cask. It's my personal favorite, but that's another one that ranks right up there in terms of its turbulence, its intensity, its darkness, smoky, peaty, all that good stuff that you and I tend to appreciate with our Islay single malts. So if you're approaching this particular bottle with that in mind, I'm gonna say you may be disappointed, which isn't to say that it's a bad whiskey. I love this whiskey and I'm having a great time drinking this whiskey, but that's because I did the reading and I sort of looked into it a little bit further. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. I sampled it prior to hitting record on the camera here. So I knew what I was getting into, and it really helps to sort of set your mind that way. I liken it to the experience of sort of drinking something when you were expecting that it would be something else. And in my childhood, I had probably one of the grossest experiences anybody can have, where I thought I was going to be drinking Sprite, the soft drink Sprite, and in fact it was milk in my glass. I nearly spat out the whole thing. It was revolting, but that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying, if you're going into it thinking it's going to be a real peat monster, that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get a beautifully complex and well-balanced dram with some significant and pronounced floral top notes, very delicate wildflower lavender for me. Anyway, this is my interpretation of the whole thing. I've got some grass in there. It's buoyed up, it's lifted up with a fresh, briny ocean breeze. The peat is there, just a whiff of smoke. On the palate, there's a strong and very juicy citrus note that punches right through that and adds a beautiful balance to the darkness of the peat. You're left with a spicy, almost cakey gingerbread finish that's medium in length. The finish itself is a little bit longer past that. For me, I got some of that bitterness with the salt tang, almost like a seaweed there. So there's a lot of complexity there. Just know what you're getting into. But on the whole, I would say 10 on 10. If you can find a bottle like this one, then definitely snap it up. And I think this time around, I would like to leave you with a quote from Haruki Murakami, a Japanese best-selling author, who once said that whiskey is like a beautiful woman. It demands attention. First you gaze, and then you drink. Until next time, stay thirsty.